Hello everybody, welcome to the JavaScript course. In this video, I'm going to discuss the REST parameters. The REST parameters are used to store function parameters of variable length. That means we don't know the exact length before we really run the functions. In this video, I'm going to discuss the application of REST parameters in conventional functions and arrow functions respectively. Now, let us see the HTML file first. The HTML file is very simple. I have a title here and a heading. And the HTML file is going to link to a JavaScript file. The file name is called myscript.js, and this JavaScript file is stored in a JS folder. In order for me to use the strict mode, I have to say use strict at the first line of the JavaScript file. And now let's take a look at the use of REST parameters. The REST parameters are of this form. We start with 3 periods, and then we can use an array called more variables to really store the contents of the function parameters. And that array is actually of variable length. So when we really run the function, the length will be evaluated on the spot. And we have to notice that this array of variable length must be put at the end of the function parameters. So we can't put more variables which represents the REST parameters at the first position of the function parameters. So let us see an example like this one. So now I want to set up a function called getAverage so that I can find out the average amount of money a certain person can obtain after a variable times of collection. So this function is set up. So you can see that I want to use the amount array to store the money that can be obtained by a variable number of collections. So at the moment of calling the getAverage function, the amount length will be evaluated. That's why I can use the amount of length to help me do the calculations. And I can use the let value of amount syntax to help me obtain the content from the amount array. So how can I call this function? Let me show you my way now. So the first call is like this. I want to show the average amount obtained by Alice. Alice has got 5 times to collect some money, and I'm able to do the alert window mentioned by the getAverage function. Save. Reload. Yes, you can see that Alice has $53.2 as an average of her 5 collections. And how about changing the length of the collections? I can show you another example. Now, I want to show the average Bob can obtain. Bob has only 3 collections. So when we call this function using these function parameters, the amount of length variable would become 3. Save. Reload. Yes, you can see that Bob has an average of about $65.6. So you can see that the evaluation would be changed according to the content of the amount array. So this part is now having only 3 elements. That means the amount array has 3 elements only in the second call. Okay. And now I'm going to show you another example that doesn't really need to use the REST parameter explicitly. The syntax is like this. I don't put anything in the function parameters. In this situation, it just accepts all the arguments obtained by the function call. And there will be a certain object called arguments to store the elements obtained in the function call. So let us see an example like this one. So that one is a simple example. The getSum function doesn't have any function parameters inside. So you can expect that I'm going to put a number of values into the getSum function, and the length of those numbers isn't important to us because the content will be stored in an object called arguments, and this is a certain built-in object for JavaScript users to use, and the arguments object would be able to help me obtain each of the elements that we put into the getSum function as the function parameters. So let us see the result. And before doing so, I have to explain this one. I just pick up any of the arguments content and I add them up to get the total sum, and that will be returned to the user when the user calls the getSum function. So let me show you my way to call the function in variable length. So the first one is to use 4 numbers to get the sum. Save, reload. Yes, you can see that the sum is 20. I just add these 4 numbers to get the value of 20. 5, 7, 6, and 2. If the length to be put into the function parameter is changed, the getSum function would still do the job. So let me see the result. Save, reload. Yes, I can get 33 as the answer. Since I now have 6 numbers, the argument object will store 6 of those numbers. Each of these numbers is separated by a comma, so the argument object is able to pick up these 6 numbers, and the 6 numbers can be looped by using the variable called x. So that is the major idea of having no arguments function call. But when we use arrow functions, we have to notice something. An arrow function has no arguments object. So if we want to do the rest parameters in an arrow function, we can't really do so. Instead, we would get the arguments of the outer calling function to become the parameters of the arrow function. So let us see an example like this one. So let me show you the skeleton of a certain function called doSomething. In this doSomething function, I'm going to set up an arrow function called getSquares. And when I want to call the getSquares in the doSomething function, we have to really rely on the values followed by the doSomething function call. So in order to do the squaring of numbers, I have to get the numbers from the doSomething function call instead of getting those numbers from the getSquares function call, because an arrow function has no arguments. That's why I have to rely on the outer calling function to get the values to be put into the arrow function. So let me continue the function. Now the function is set up. The arguments object here refers to the arguments of the doSomething function, not of the getSquares function, because it is an arrow function. Okay, so when it comes to having an arrow function, the arguments object will refer to those arguments put into the outer calling function. So the argument has its length, and if it is 0, that means I don't have any input to the doSomething function. Else, if there are some values put in the doSomething function, each of the elements can be looped to get the squares, which will be shown on the alert window. So let us see the result of calling this doSomething function. First, I would like to demonstrate the situation when there is no value put into the doSomething function. Save. Reload. Yes, I can see no inputs because at that time, the arguments would have no content. That's why the length would be 0. How about having 2 values in the doSomething function call? Save. Reload. Yes, I would get 4 first because the first value to be put into the getSquare function is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. And 6 times 6 is 36. 6 here comes from the second argument that would be put into the doSomething function, which will be passed to the getSquares function, which is an arrow function. So that's why we can do getSquares arrow function by using the function which is just known as the outer calling function. So this video has already talked about so many ways to apply the REST parameters into JavaScript functions. The first thing is to use the REST parameters by indicating a certain array with 3 periods. The second way is to apply no arguments so that the arguments object will be used to remember the variable argument length to be put into the calling function. And we have to notice that an arrow function has no arguments object. That's why an arrow function has to rely on its outer calling function to get a parameters to be put into the arrow function. This is the end of the video. If you have any questions about my video, please leave your questions on the comment section below the video. If you like this video, please give me a like and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.